What's up, beautiful people? I'm Gabby, and you're listening to the Growing Black Girl Podcast, an empowering podcast for those looking to learn from the shit we grow through. Join me weekly as we dig deeper into self-love, mental health and wellness, entrepreneurship, and so much more. So, whether you're a growing black girl, a grown black girl, or not a girl at all, this is a space for you. Let's start the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm so happy that you are tuning in. I'm sorry for my absence, if you noticed, and if you didn't notice, define absence. So we are starting a series on boundaries. The title of the series is F Around and Find Out, because I think we're going to find over the next couple of weeks that when people cross your boundaries, or you allow people to cross your boundaries, people are effing around and they should find out. So the reason why I picked this topic is I really thought that I had boundaries under control. I think definitely in the last several years, I've been more intentional and been more vocal about my boundaries. But up until a month ago, I really thought I was doing the thing. And I think I was confusing not allowing people to disrespect me as me having very strong boundaries. And I'm realizing that that's not necessarily the same thing. Is it important to make sure that people aren't being nasty and disrespectful for you and really sticking up for yourself? Of course. And does that sort of play into boundaries? Absolutely. Is what you will and allow people, allow people to speak to you or say to you, those things constitute as a boundary. And that's not all that it is. So I want to talk a little bit about what boundaries are to me, why I think they're important, why I think we need them, and then sort of break down the guidelines for boundaries. Going into this series, these are the things that I think are important for you to know. And then in part 2, because we're still doing a part 1 and part 2 version, I'll give you the actual definition of what boundaries are and then explain where we're going from here and what I hope that you get from this series, what I'm hoping to get from this series. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So boundaries to me, again, I think for a long time were me sticking up for myself. I think a lot of my early developmental years were about me sort of people pleasing. I think a lot of us maybe have gone through that where we adapted and molded to fit whatever someone's idea of us was. And I experienced that a lot growing up. I would always come home with my feelings hurt because I didn't stick up for myself and I let people walk all over me and just didn't have a very strong sense of self, which is normal because I was a child. But that kind of carried, through middle school, through high school. And then when I got to college, it was like a switch flipped and I became, one could argue, a little bit of an asshole, maybe. And you can hear the inflection in my voice letting you know I'm not sold on that description of myself, but I want to count that I went complete polar opposite in every single thought that I had. I vocalized. I was not shy about my feelings. I was not shy about what I thought of other people's situations. I just said what I thought in the moment and didn't care about my delivery. Oh, you know what it was? In college, I had no tact. I was tactless. Like, just anything. If I thought what you were doing was dumb, I was not like, hey, maybe there's another way we could approach this. I was like, that's dumb, and let me tell you why. Like, geez. But I'm a growing black girl now. I was a growing black girl then, and we grow, we move forward. So I think that complete switch could have been disguised as having boundaries and formulating those boundaries. It was definitely a growth area for me, and it was definitely an opportunity of growth where I needed to learn what that balance was. of how I let people treat me, what I am okay with, what I'm not okay with. And I'm sure it was a really great opportunity for the people in my life to flex and recognize those boundaries for them as well. If I was coming to them out of pocket, it was an opportunity for them to be like, hey, homie, you're actually not going to speak to me like that. And to sort of define and solidify those boundaries as well. After college, I was working. I've just always worked multiple jobs and have worked a lot, always, my whole life. And I think having boundaries really started to show up in some ways for me at work. And again, still a learning process coming out of college and working, going into a workforce that is different, that there are a lot of different age groups, a lot of different factors in a way that's different from the kind of jobs that you might work in college, like working in retail, working in a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 type scenario, whether it's a corporate setting, whether, you know what, y'all, I'm saying a lot of words for me to say I was working a singular full-time job. And being with those people every single day where a lot of the policies and things that are being implemented actually affect you because you're there more than you are at your own home. It affects you differently than it does when you are, working somewhere part-time. So that was another place that I had to really learn boundaries, and that was difficult. It was difficult to navigate that I can't speak to people any way that I want to, and that the way that I stick up for myself and defend myself, or the way that I am vocal about things that I'm passionate about and that I care about, that there is a time and a place and a way to deliver those messages. I had to learn that. I had to take that time and figure that out. And I thought I was doing good. If I'm being honest, I thought I was on the right track. I thought I was doing a great job. And it wasn't until, quite frankly, the last month and in preparing my notes for what I wanted this episode to be about, that I realized that there are so many places that I need to practice having boundaries. So I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a sneak peek of where this series is going to go. Obviously, today this is an intro. And then we are going to do friends and family, the workplace, and boundaries with yourself. And so I'm just going to kind of talk about the places that I do great and that I don't do great with those boundaries in the effort and to attempt to sort of shed light on the areas that maybe you are really good at having strong boundaries and where those boundaries need to be fortified. So thinking about friends and the workplace, places that I think I'm really good at having boundaries is, for the most part, I don't let people talk to me any kind of way. I am very passionate, and this is probably also a growth area as well as strength. Can it be both? I don't know. I'm deciding right now that it is. It is like my biggest pet peeve to be blamed for things that aren't my fault, and not in a I make excuses kind of way. I want to take accountability and I want to account for any negative impact that I may have caused. And I am also very quick to say, whoa, 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 whoa. I definitely sent you that email. Let me find it so I can refresh your memory. Or, no, remember I told you that was a bad idea. Please don't come back and say, why didn't anybody tell me not to date him? He was a walking red flag. Whoa, whoa. I can pull the receipts because I definitely said, I don't know if that's the right move, player. So I think I'm really good in those areas of trying not to hound my opinions or hound my feelings into someone, which is not a thing I was doing in college. I would tell you that I thought that was a bad idea until the cows came home. And it took my aunt, who's my best friend, in case you don't know, it took my aunt saying, don't be so honest that you lose the people that you care about, for me to say, oh, I only have to say it once. I only have to say, hey, I don't know if this is a good idea. This is why. And I love you and I'll support you through your decision and in any outcome. But I still struggle with if something comes up and someone's like, well, this particular thing at work didn't get done, and I'm included in the conversation of it didn't get done, I'm very quick to say, but I did my part. And that's not always helpful, I guess. But it also feels like a boundary. If I'm working really hard and I'm trying to get this work done and someone else drops the ball, it doesn't feel, in my mind, like this needs to be an us conversation. It feels like y'all could have left me out of this one because I showed up. I did my part. Again, if you disagree, if you are listening to this somewhere and you're like, ooh, I can see where she needs to grow right now, that's okay. I respect that. You're probably not wrong. And that really bothers me. If I'm doing hard work and then I'm lumped into being a part of the problem, I don't like that. So I'm very vocal about no. Gabby did her thing. Another place that I think I'm really good when it comes to boundaries with friends, that's kind of like dancing a little bit into the workplace, but with friends and family, I think I am learning more and more in adult relationships that there are people that it's worth holding your boundaries for, and there are people that are just not worth the risk or whatever could come up from having that conversation of holding your boundaries. If I do a risk assessment, let's say I have two new friends and two family members, and I have a very specific boundary, my two new friends, I can express that very explicit boundary to them and say, hey, I'm not okay with that. That hurt my feelings or that made me uncomfortable, and I would appreciate if you could not do it again or do your best to be aware of that behavior that affects me in this way. And I have family members that if I tried to express that same boundary, they would be like, I'm sorry. What? Who are you talking to right now? Is that an area for me to grow in potentially? And if I'm thinking this is somebody that I see once a year, it might not be worth it for me to have that conversation about this boundary because it's not someone that affects my life day to day. Again, maybe a hot take on boundaries, but I try to have that risk assessment in as well. It is not, some boundaries to me are not worth enforcing with people that I don't interact with on a day-to-day basis. And some days, some people F around and they find out, right? If someone at the Target, not an employee because that's a different thing. If someone in Target is bothering me and I'm having a day, some days I might be like, hey, you're crossing my literal boundary and I need you to be 6 feet. I need you to back up 6 feet. You're too close to me in this line and your exhales are becoming my inhales and I'm not a fan. I need you to back up. There are some of those two. Risk assessment, you can do them often and they can change each time. So that's a little bit of where I do good and don't do the bestest with friends and family. There are some things I'm willing to give myself grace for. Like I said, if I do a risk assessment of kind of picking and choosing my battles and saying hey, is this worth addressing right now? Or is this uncomfortable experience going to be over in the next day or two and then I don't have to worry about it again? Cool. I get to make that decision for me. You get to make that decision for you. We talked about the workplace a little bit. Gonna jump back into talking about the workplace and the places that I do good and don't do well having boundaries there. I have realized, again, for the 4th time over this last month, that I have a hard time saying no. What? I know. And if you're listening to this, you probably have a hard time saying no too. And I don't know why. It's just a feeling that I get. If you are a woman and have identified or grown up in this world as female presenting, then you already know. Female presenting, female identifying, all of them. You already know that we are not raised or conditioned to say no. It is not how we are brought up at all. Which is why we struggle with boundaries. We are often people pleasers, typically women identifying, women presenting. We are people pleasers because we are not conditioned. We are not trained to say no. We are not trained or brought up for the boundary of our autonomy. And I see that show up a lot for me when it comes to work. Even if I am slammed, and I like to be busy, I don't like to do the same thing every day. So I like working several jobs. I like having different things come on my plate and to have a variety of different things I can be doing. I love that. And when I am drowning and someone says, hey, do you have time to do this real quick? I very rarely say no. Very rarely do I say, no, I don't have time for that. Or if I wake up one morning on the weekend and I'm like, listen, to make next week go better and flow more smoothly, you just need to work. I know you want to go hang out with your friends. I know you want to take a nap, multiple naps. I know you want to get a coffee and go walk around and spend money you have no business spending. Hello, boundary with self that we're about to get into. I know that that's what you want to do, but what you need to do is sit your happy butt down at that computer and catch up on work. So that way you're not, tacking on last week's responsibilities onto a new week. And someone will text me and say, hey, do you want to hang out today? Or, hey, we're going to go do this thing tonight. Or, hey, do you want to come over and we can have a movie night? And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. And I don't think twice about it. When I know that I need to set a boundary with work, with my friends, with myself and say, no, I have to do this thing because I know that it's going to help me out in the long run. She don't do it. I love to have a good time. And as soon as somebody's like, hey, do you want to do this? I'm like, responsibilities where? And so that's an area that I can improve on. And the last category is boundaries with myself. Yikes. This one is hard. This one's hard. And it's the last episode of this series for a reason. I think it's a lot easier to enforce boundaries with other people than it is to enforce them with yourself. I don't know why. I think maybe it has to do a little bit with accountability and the way that we treat ourselves is the way that we show other people how to treat us. And if we had to be really firm and decisive and steadfast about the boundaries that we have with ourselves and the way that we show up for ourselves, and that was the example that we set for other people, it's kind of scary to think about what other people would do, their reactions. If I was so solid and truthful and living in, keeping that sense of my boundaries, my beliefs, and all of that was really strong, the people that are in my life now, like, could I do a risk assessment for people if my boundaries were crazy strong? I have no idea. I don't know if I could give people grace if my boundaries were crazy strong, if my boundaries with myself were that way. And I think some of the ways that I ignore the boundaries with myself are in the ways that I do or don't show up for myself. It is in the fact that I can wake up one day and say, you know what? Today is going to be a great day and I'm going to accomplish X, Y, and Z, knowing that Z on that list is the most annoying task, or the task that gives me pause, or the task that I feel like is going to be a huge, cumbersome thing. and I kind of talk myself out of it or stop before I even start, knowing that Z is my problem child. And so I do everything. I do all the letters in the alphabet, so I don't have time to get to Z. Hello, this is the Growing Black Girl recording a podcast that should have been recorded a month ago. Sit in that truth, Gabby. You know, this is a safe space. I hope you guys are being equally as honest with yourselves. Having strong boundaries with myself is saying, I am going to track these habits Monday through Friday because they're going to be good for me and it'll be a good thing for me, and not being consistent in them. I'm like lying to myself, and I wouldn't let somebody else lie to me. I wouldn't let my friends or my family lie to me or treat me that way. But wouldn't I? If I can't be honest, if I can't trust myself to follow through because I set my own boundary and then repeatedly disrespect it, who is stopping anyone else from doing the same? I can't speak for you, but even saying that, I'm looking at myself and saying, you look goofy. You look straight up goofy. Telling other people not to treat you that way and you treat yourself that way. Think about how you speak to yourself, how you speak to about your body, how you speak about the things that you're doing, even just in passing, even like jokingly, when something happens and you go, oh, I'm so dumb. What? Why would someone else not call you dumb if you would call you dumb? I think that that's a boundary. And again, boundaries are something that you set for yourself. So if you wouldn't let somebody else call you dumb, but you call yourself dumb, I don't think that that's a boundary that you can truly enforce. And if you disagree, again, it's the point of the podcast, so that's totally fine. I don't know how you enforce something like that if you don't enforce it with yourself. And that's for you to decide. So why do we need boundaries? Why is this an important conversation for us to be having together? And for you to be having with the people that are in your inner circle and talking with them. Boundaries are our standards, in a sense. You'll know that expression, like, nobody will love me like I love me. Yeah, that's a part of your boundaries. That plays into that. We're going to slide on over into our guidelines for boundaries. These are the things that I believe, and we'll find out if they continue to be guidelines as we go through this series, of course, because that's how we do things over here. But I have 3 guidelines to kind of leave you off with in part 1, and then we'll get into part 2 in just a second. The first guideline for boundaries that I want you to keep in mind as we go through each of these episodes in this series is that they are your responsibility to enforce and live by. No one else's. Your boundaries are not a gate or fence that you prevent other people from crossing. Let me say that again. For the people in the back, your boundaries are not a gate or a fence that you prevent other people from crossing. They're not. You are not inside of a gate and the gate is not surrounding you. That's not how this works. You are on the outside of said gate, said fence with everybody else, and you are like the bouncer of that gate or fence. And you just say, oh, hey, totally know you want to come to this party. Totally know you want to get in. It's bumping. It's cool over there. And this is the entrance fee. Oh, you can't pay the entrance fee? Hey, man, totally get it. That's totally fine. But you just can't come into this space. I hope that analogy makes sense. You're the bouncer. You decide who you're making exceptions for. You decide who you're paying the cover for. Or you can say, hey, with all the love and respect, you can't come in here. You can't afford this right now. And that's okay. That doesn't say anything about you as a person, nothing. It just means you can't afford to be in this space right now. And I feel like that's a difference that we all need to be better about. We are not gatekeeping ourselves from people. We are just allowing people who can afford to be here to be here. And I set the price. I set the price with my friends. I set the price with my family. I set the price at work, and I set the price with myself. Sometimes I set the price with myself and I F around and find out, and I just be letting myself walk all over myself and violate these boundaries that I'm saying, like, hey, you got to be this tall to ride this ride. And some days I'd be like, stand on your tiptoes, girl. See if you can get in. And that's not the point. That's not the plan. That's not what we're trying to do. Our boundaries are our responsibility to enforce and live by, which leads us into guideline number 2. We cannot hold people to boundaries we do not effectively communicate. Let's go back to the, cost of being in my space. I can't expect you to pay to get into my space if I don't tell you how much it costs or what that looks like. If I am not clearly communicating what it looks like to be in my space, then how can I expect you to pay it? And I say that because I think it kind of falls into a policy for myself that I developed a while ago, and it's that I do not allow myself to be mad at people that don't know that I am mad. Helps me make sure that I am effectively communicating my frustration and standing up for myself and naming, again, that boundary. And it takes the guesswork. I don't like guessing what other people are feeling at all. I don't like it. I don't want that to be taking up space in my brain. And so if you've known me for more than 2 hours, we'll give it more time. If you've known me for more than 2 hours, then I have likely already told you, if I do something that hurts you, tell me. You will not hurt my feelings. I will not make it weird. I will not be like, that sounds like a you problem. I want to know, because my intention is never to hurt you. My intention is never to violate your trust or belittle you or make you feel small or anything. I don't have negative intentions. And so if my impact comes off negatively, I need to be aware. So that way my intentions and my impact are aligning, are copacetic. So we can't hold people to boundaries that we do not effectively communicate. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but effective communication most likely doesn't happen in the heat of an argument. It just doesn't. We're both mad. Nobody's communicating effectively. Effective communication is not happening if you're talking while I'm talking, because neither of us is listening. Effective communication doesn't happen if you are listening to respond and not listening to absorb what I'm saying. Ooh, do we need a series on effective communication? Stop it. Let's move on to guideline number 3 for boundaries. We are the best examples of how strong our boundaries are. Whew. I don't have an example for that one other than my entire rant about boundaries with ourselves. We are the best examples of how strong our boundaries are. Sit with it. And I'll be back in just a second with an actual definition of what a boundary is, where we're going from here, which you guys kind of already know what the next couple episodes are going to be about, but I'm going to dive into them just a little bit more. And then I'm going to name out some intentions and my hopes of what we're going to get from this series. I'll be back in 2 shakes. All right, we are back with part 2 of this episode on boundaries. Intro to boundaries, F around and find out, part 1. So, our actual working definition for boundaries. Boundaries help us communicate what we are or not willing to do in our interactions with others. So, let's take that again with what we talked about for our guidelines, what we are or are not willing to do. Not what we allow or don't allow others to do, what we are or not willing to do in our interaction with others. And setting and maintaining boundaries helps us hold on to, or helps us be selective with, our internal resources, energy, time, emotions, patience, etc. So that way we can focus on and dedicate that internal resource to the things that actually matter to us. So that's our actual definition. That's our working definition. Okay, so where are we going from here? We've got our guidelines. We've got our actual working definition. And you are obviously listening to the introduction to boundaries. Next week, we are going to boundaries with friends and family. That we're going to talk about my experience with boundaries with friends, talk about my experience with boundaries with families, how, the things that I feel like I'm doing well, the things I'm sucking at. And then part 2, I'm going to do a little bit of research, figure out some culturally competent tools, and I'll explain that a little bit more in just a second. And then, that'll be part 1 and part 2, and that'll follow throughout. After boundaries with family and friends, we're doing boundaries at work. And then last but not least, we're doing boundaries with self. So from this series, I'm hoping to gain, and hoping that you're going to gain, culturally competent tools for effectively communicating my boundaries or your boundaries in a variety of scenarios. I added culturally competent because the same way our white counterparts might communicate their boundaries with their friends, with their family, and in the workplace is going to be very different if you are a growing black girl, a grown black girl, or not a girl at all. It's all going to look very different based off of the way that you present to the world. So I want to make sure that the tools are culturally competent and that we look at them across a variety of scenarios. So that's with family, that's with friends, and that's also in the workplace. Again, if you are a brown woman, the way that you label and identify your boundaries in the workplace is going to be different than a white woman would or a white person would. So want to make sure that those are culturally competent, and that the other podcasts that you're listening to that are also talking about boundaries, that we're not just taking those as law, and that we are being mindful of, other people's experiences and how we all move through the world differently. The second thing that I want to gain from this series, and that I hope that you gain from this series, is a new perspective and a greater understanding of where you currently are with your boundary setting and where you want to go. A thing that a group that I work with that we always say is that the map is not the territory. And that basically means that if you look at a map, it is 2D, and it might say there's mountains over there, but those mountains might feel a lot differently when you are walking them. They might look a lot different, all of that. So the map is not the territory, but we still need the map to navigate said territory. So I think it's important that we all take the time to look at where we are in these different areas with our boundary setting, and then really take the time to assess what feels right and true to me on where I want to go with those. And then the last one, and I think potentially the most important thing, the most important intention that we are setting right now, is that this series is hopefully going to give you the permission to struggle through boundary setting, to fluctuate in how powerful, how strong, how steadfast you are on your boundaries in a variety of situations. And it is going to give you the permission to keep showing up and keep growing in these areas, however that looks for you. Again, and I will say it until the very last episode of this podcast, this is a safe space. We are all here learning together. You have the permission to listen to this series and say, nah, love that. Love what you're trying to do there. It's a great idea, great concept. We love a boundary. And my boundary is me not trying to work on this right now. I don't have time. I don't have the patience. I don't have the internal resources to work on this right now. And that is okay. You have that permission from me. And I hope that this external permission helps you give that permission to yourself as well. So join me back next week. We'll see how I show up with the boundaries for myself next week when we talk about boundaries with friends and family. See you guys then. Bye.